Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Suzanne DiMaggio. I'm the Vice President of Asia Society's Global Policy Programs. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this very special event. Asia Society is very pleased to be hosting this unprecedented public conversation between two knowledgeable and influential representatives of Iran and the United States, focused on arguably the most intractable foreign policy challenge today. With the next round of nuclear talks between Iran and the P5+1 group just days away, there is a sense of urgency to break the impasse. There have been many proposals put forward, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the contents of those proposals, but I think it's fair to say that the contours of a potential deal based around limiting uranium enrichment and full access to nuclear sites in Iran in exchange for carrots from the West, including sanctions relief, are already quite clear. It's how to get there that remains the enduring dilemma that we face today. Each side doubts the other's readiness to reach an endgame that both can accept. As we have seen over the years, when one side has been ready to negotiate, the other side has not. The question remains, can we reach a mutually acceptable approach for heading off a disastrous confrontation? We all recognize the profound differences that exist between the governments of Iran and the United States, and to be sure, these differences go well beyond the nuclear issue. Dialogue offers the best way forward, and it is in that spirit that we welcome Ambassador Mohammad Khazaee and Ambassador Thomas Pickering to Asia Society for this candid exchange of views. Special thanks to both of you for joining us today. I know, Ambassador Khazaee, this is a first for you to be engaging in this way, and Ambassador Pickering made his way from Washington to be here today, so thank you. This discussion is the latest in a series of Iran-focused events that Asia Society has hosted over many years. It is part of our strong commitment to public and private policy dialogue with the aim of discussing the contentious issues that define the bilateral relationship, while also attempting to identify areas of common interest and to think through possible policy options and solutions. In addition to our policy work focused on contemporary Iran and Iran-U.S. relations, Asia Society has also had a long-standing commitment to presenting programming that brings Iran's rich culture to American and Asian audiences. For example, our museum has presented acclaimed exhibitions of magnificent artwork from the Sasanian and Safavid periods, as well as shows on contemporary Iranian artists. In the fall, we will have a groundbreaking exhibition called Iran Modern, which will focus on nearly 20 Iranian artists who developed their own artistic voice in the 1960s and 1970s. It's the first exhibition to look in in-depth way at these pioneers of modernism. Asia Society has also presented performing artists from Iran, including Shahram Nazari, whom we honored with a Lifetime Cultural Heritage Award in 2007, Hafez Nazari, and Parisa. If you would like to learn more about Asia Society's work across the fields of policy, business, arts, culture, and education, please visit our website at asiasociety.org. And, of course, the best way to stay informed of the range of things that we're doing is to become a member today. Now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Ambassador Mohammad Khazaee is permanent representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the United Nations and Iran's highest-ranking official in the United States. He previously served as Vice Minister for International Affairs and President of the Organization for Economic and Technical Assistance in Iran's Ministry of Economic Affairs. He also represented Iran at the World Bank and served as a member of Parliament. Ambassador Thomas Pickering is well known to audiences here at Asia Society. He reached the rank of Career Ambassador, the highest in the U.S. Foreign Service, retiring as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs in 2000. He served as U.S. Ambassador to the Russian Federation, India, Israel, El Salvador, Nigeria, Jordan, and to the United Nations. And more recently, he was appointed by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to lead the Accountability Review Board, probing the attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. And we are delighted to have David Ignatius with us to navigate this discussion. David is an associate editor and award-winning columnist for the Washington Post. He is also the author of 8 novels. My personal favorite is The Increment, probably not a surprise, but they're all good. Ambassadors Pickering and Khazaee will each deliver brief opening remarks. David will then preside over the discussion. We will end with a Q&A session, during which time David will be presenting our speakers with questions taken from the note cards submitted by you, our audience. Gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to turn the floor to you. Ambassador Pickering.
Good afternoon, and thank you. And thank you, Suzanne, for inviting me. Even more, thank you for the privilege and honor of joining my friend Ambassador Khazaee, who is in this particular event performing a coming out party, to which I warmly welcome him.
Thank you very much.
I've had the opportunity to know and speak with Ambassador Khazaee for some time, and I found him informative, intelligent, direct, well-versed in his country's policies and the background to them, and someone who it has always been worth listening to. And so it is indeed a pleasure and honor to be with you here. David Ignatius is well known in his own right, and any little heap of praise I might put on his head might well detract from his sterling reputation. But nevertheless, I found David one of the most important to be read columnists in the United States, and it is an honor to join him. One small correction. Suzanne said that we both were here representing our countries, and I would love to do that, but I've done that. And I must, with all frankness, tell you that I cannot speak for the United States. I must speak for myself, in part because I'm no longer in their employ, and in part because the liberation of speaking for myself for a dozen years and have no intention of ending that. Let me also say that we are at an important moment. Iran and the United States have been separated by over 30 years of mistrust and misunderstanding, and it is serious. There has been much talk of war, much inflammatory talk of war, and I believe it is a serious mistake. It's a serious mistake not to talk to people from whom we are estranged, and it's a serious mistake to believe that military force can solve diplomatic problems, as we have found out most recently in Iraq. I'm dedicated to the notion that we must have a conversation and a discussion and a negotiation with Iran. And I am pleased that President Obama has put himself in the forefront of the effort to try to do this. My own feeling is that the meetings that will take place in Kazakhstan on the 26th of February between the principal members of the Security Council in Germany and Iran are an important next step in the long, troubled, and difficult search for a solution. There are many issues that divide the United States and Iran, and as a result, there is a full plate to be dealt with in any conversations. I am convinced that military force, as I said a moment ago, is not a way to solve the problem. And recently, a small group in which I had the honor to participate produced a book on the costs and benefits of the use of military force, which I would recommend if you're interested. That was followed by a subsequent book to talk about sanctions and their costs and benefits against Iran. and I hope you too will look at that. It was an effort to inform the public about the dangers of proceeding with these particular policies as the forefront of our effort. I believe now is the time when we must give considerable additional attention to negotiations. There is a second Obama administration. Senator Kerry, now Secretary Kerry, has paid a great deal of personal attention to the issue of Iran, and I believe brings ideas and indeed constructive thoughts to the process. So too has the appointee of being Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, who I hope soon will be confirmed by the Senate and will bring into that office a deep understanding of both the problems that we have with Iran, but I know of approaches that will find ways, I think, to solve those problems. Just a few words before I sit down on negotiations. Negotiations need to take place in an atmosphere of dignity and mutual respect, as we know. Both sides deserve that, and both sides, I hope, will seek and continue to seek that. Secondly, this is a complex series of problems. Many have suggested that a grand bargain might well be the solution. My own feeling after numerous years of diplomatic experience is that the larger the effort to try to resolve a problem, the more complex it becomes. A statement among diplomats is too many moving parts. As a result, they can take years, they can involve many extraneous issues, and they can lead not to the building of trust and understanding, but quite to the contrary. So I am frightened of that particular approach. I believe, however, we have to have a grand agenda, which means we must be dedicated to resolving as many of the issues between us as we can, including the nuclear question. I also believe that it's important to start small and to use small steps to build trust. And so I believe that we can, in the nuclear question in particular, find a way to begin to deal with some of the most salient questions. Perhaps the most prominent among them is the deep concern that the United States shares with its friends and allies over the level of enrichment currently being pursued in Iran at 20%, and the hope that Iran will find that it has shortly a sufficient amount of material to fuel the reactors for which this is intended. Medical isotope production is principally the work of those reactors, and that we can find a way between the two of us, on the one hand easing sanctions, and on the other hand accepting limits on enrichment, which can begin to build the trust and confidence that is out there. I believe as well that within the context of the negotiations between the P5 and Iran, there ought to be time made for conversations between the United States and Iran. We are in many ways the principal subjects of the differences, and we have to speak, perhaps in private, to begin to build the confidence and strength to move the questions ahead. Many have asked, and principally Iran, what would be the end game of all of this? On the broader side, I would like to think that through a process of negotiation, Iran and the United States can enjoy a normal relationship, but that will take a great deal of time. In between, one would like to see a resolution of problems. Iran has asked frequently in public what would be the view of the United States on the arrangements necessary to resolve the nuclear question. I cannot speak for the United States, but I can for myself on this issue say that I think there are 4 principal steps, 2 on each side, which need to be made to accomplish a resolution of this problem. On the United States side, I believe with progress on the nuclear issues, there should be progress in taking away those sanctions placed on Iran for the purpose, obviously, of achieving a nuclear settlement. And there needs to be at the same time, and this will be hard for the United States, but it's important, a recognition of Iran's right to enrich for its civil program, limited for civil purposes in quality and quantity, if I can phrase it that way. The United States, I would hope, would find from the Iranian side a willingness, in fact, to take steps to assure that both Iran's pledge in the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the commitment of its supreme leader in the fatwa recently reiterated against nuclear weapons and their use would in fact become made a greater reality for us by accepting the limitations on enrichment in quantity and quality which are sufficient for its civil nuclear program. And secondly, along with that, my fourth point, that they would accept IAEA, UN International Atomic Energy Agency inspections and monitoring, judged by the IAEA itself to be sufficient to provide the kind of assurance that Iran does not move from its civil program to a military program of making weapons. This is consistent with what both sides have been saying to each other, but it hasn't yet been articulated in a form and in a way which I hope could be articulated privately, I hope, if necessary publicly, which will in effect set a stage, which I think will give the diplomats at Kazakhstan something important to do. So it's a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to make these opening remarks, and I now take great pleasure, in addition to turning this podium over to my friend, Ambassador Mohammad Khazaee.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Tom, for your nice words. I very much appreciate it. It's really a great pleasure and honor for me to be here today with you, especially being here with my two friends, Mr. Ignatius, as well as Ambassador Thomas Pickering. After his speech, it's very difficult for me to speak, actually. His language, his experience, his knowledge about the whole issues that he talked about that. But allow me at the outset to thank the management of Asia Society for organizing such a wonderful evening, especially Ms. Susan DiMaggio, Vice President, Global Policy Programs, and the rest of the management for inviting me to this gathering. It's a pleasure for me to be here today when I see many good friends among you. As much as I can see, of course, the lights don't let me to see all of you, but I see that distinguished ambassadors from the United Nations also are among us, and also His Excellency, the Deputy of Secretary General is here among us, my good friend, and many other distinguished guests that they have attended this meeting today. I will try today in my opening remarks to focus on the, I should say, latest development, which is the issue of discussion or negotiation between the two countries, and give you the Iranian perspective and impression about this issue. I'm sure that most of you, or maybe all of you, are aware of the details of the issue, and you are very much familiar about the Iranian way of thinking, and maybe some of you also know much better than me, of course, how things are perceived in the United States. But I think it's my duty to give you a little bit more explanation about how Iranians look at the U.S.-Iran relation and what we expect from the future, hopefully negotiation or discussion or most probably cooperation. The Islamic Republic of Iran, as heir to 7,000-year-old civilization and a rich culture, deep rooted in annals of history as well as a record of close to 3 centuries of no aggression against any country, is well versed in dealing and interacting with other nations. Article 152 of the Iranian Constitution, upon which the foreign policy of the Islamic Republic of Iran is based, stipulates the establishment of a peaceful relationship with all nations based on mutual respect and legal parity. Thus, diplomatic negotiations and dialogue with the United States does not constitute a red line for my country, although it is only a part of the complicated and multi-layered relationship between Iran and US, which was very well stipulated by Ambassador Pickering. However, the question is as to why the establishment of relationship between our 2 countries on a just and equal footing has so far been elusive. And while both sides declare their readiness to negotiate, how does each of them define negotiations and their implications? I am not intent today of dissecting the history of Iran-US relations and enunciate the strains in the past decades. Instead, I prefer to be proactive and forward-looking. Nonetheless, to briefly elucidate the conditions that I referred to, I feel I need to very briefly review the major developments that have affected the relationship between our 2 countries, hoping that it helps us better grasp the reason for the current mistrust and therefore better prepare to break the impasse. First, in principle, diplomatic ties between nations should not be cut off under any circumstances. Despite grievances and bitter experiences, mostly emanated from the gross intervention in Iran's domestic affairs, which inter alia led to the coup in 1953 against the Iranian democratically elected government, the Islamic Republic of Iran did not initiate severing ties with the United States. The diplomatic rupture occurred in April 1980 on the initiative taken by the then US administration. Despite so-called US Operation Eagle Claw in the same month, which constituted a blatant act of aggression against Iran, Tehran agreed as a sign of goodwill to take part in the negotiations that led to the signing of the Algiers Accords. Whereas the US government, which had committed itself, according to the same accords, to respecting Iran's rights and to abstaining from intervening and interfering in Iran's domestic affairs, not only failed to honor its commitment, but also it increased its intervention and at times its hostility. Second, in the course of the 2 decades following the Algiers Accords, more bitter moves were made by successive US administrations against the Iranian people. You may tell me that you know all these things, but I want to honestly give you how Iranian thinks when we are talking in Iran about the negotiation or relation with the United States, which is an important issue in the eyes of all Iranian politicians, leadership, parliament, government, and even people. They included lending support to Saddam Hussein in his war against Iran, attacking two Iranian offshore oil platforms in the Persian Gulf in 1987, shooting down Iranian passenger jet airliner, killing 290 innocent people in 1988, trying to disrupt Iran's ties with its neighbors, allocating budget to destabilize the Iranian government, and the list goes on and on. The confidence-building measures that Iran adopted during the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, the Afghan war in 2001, and the U.S. attack on Iraq, and the U.S. attack on Iraq in 2003, as well as the 3 rounds of talks between Iran and the United States on the U.S. force status in Iraq and Iran's readiness for the 4th round, all regrettably met with disappointing answers by the United States, which included branding Iran as a part of so-called axis of evil, following Iran's constructive approach on the Afghan front. Actually, if I remember correctly, 1 week after a fruitful negotiation between Iran and US, that later on the government of Khazaee was established, we were called by the US president as axis of evil. Third, gaps between the US declared positions and the actions against the Iranian nation have been widening in the past few years. As you know, Senator Barack Obama, in an interview with the New York Times in 2007, envisioned foregoing a new relationship with Iran and stated that if elected president, he would, I quote, engage in aggressive personal diplomacy, unquote, with Iran by conducting talks at the highest level, offering economic endowments and a promise not to seek regime change. Nonetheless, the president-elect, in the first step, left unanswered the congratulatory message, a letter sent by the Iranian president to him. In his Nowruz message, in March 20th, 2009, President Obama stated that, I quote, "My administration is now committed to diplomacy that addresses the full range of issues before us," unquote. He stressed that instead of threats, he would seek engagement that is honest and grounded in mutual respect. The same themes also appeared in the letters President Obama sent to Iran's supreme leader, which I personally carried out. They represented a new approach that the Iranian welcomed, and that letter was replied properly. As the supreme leader of Iran stated in his speech in March 2009 in the city of Mashhad, northeast of Iran, I also could assert that had the Islamic Republic of Iran observed the slightest sign indicating a practical change in the United States government behavior, it would have certainly reciprocated in kind. Now let me refer to a few actions by the US government that went counter to its ostensibly friendly gesture. Beginning from November 2009, the US government took a number of aggressive measures against Iran, which include signing into law at least 4 major acts and issuing 9 executive orders that you are all aware of. And I don't need to detail them. It is just worth mentioning that, in comparison, the whole number of executive orders that had been issued against Iran by the previous US presidents in the preceding 25 years had not gone beyond 18. The above are only part of the destructive measures against Iran. I don't want to take more time by detailing such confrontational measures as cyber warfare against Iran's nuclear sites, the terrorist attacks against Iranian nuclear scientists by the Israeli regime, and removing the known terrorist group responsible for the killing of more than 16,000 ordinary Iranians from the terrorist list. The moves that I refer to consist definitely of economic war against the Iranian people, if not tantamount to declaring war against a sovereign state. In sum, when the US proposes negotiations in Munich and few days later gives effect to new and harsher sanctions against the Iranian people in Washington, how could anybody expect the Iranians not to be doubtful and not to ask for proof of the United States' seriousness and goodwill? Each of these actions alone could cast serious doubt on the goodwill of the United States government in establishing a just relationship with Iran in the minds of the Iranians, who consider themselves victims of the US policies for the last few decades. In principle, the logic of the two-track policy of diplomacy and pressure is incomprehensible, as it constitutes a conflict in terms. Regrettably, for some in the United States, pressure has become an end in itself. The dual track was not even dual, as it relied on one track, and that was pressure. They naively believe that pressure and diplomacy complement each other. Some even wrongly attribute Iran's readiness to participate in the forthcoming negotiation in Kazakhstan to pressure. The wrong perception maintaining that the time is not on Iran's side should be rectified as well, because the ambiguous position of the West in parallel with more pressure can only beget more distrust, leading Iran in turn to lose hope in a negotiated settlement. Regrettably, the facts on the ground and the US behaviors are indicative of their miscalculations and inaccurate information about the realities of today's Iran. Their assumption that Iran would succumb to pressure is chief among these miscalculations. The unprecedented rally to commemorate the anniversary of the Islamic Revolution 2 weeks ago, in which millions of people took part across the country, was an additional sign indicating the people's lack of confidence in the US on the one hand and the fatality of the economic pressure on the other. Consequently, the approach of the Islamic Republic of Iran to negotiation is different. On the one hand, Iran's sensitivity towards such negotiations emanates from its concern over the conditions leading to negotiations and the result thereof. It should not be interpreted as opposition to negotiation per se, as we have repeatedly stated our readiness for negotiations. We have repeatedly stated our readiness for negotiations. Iran's concern over the result of negotiations arises from the realities and United States behaviors, which hang a serious question mark over negotiations per se. The Iranians believe, I was in Iran, I just came back about a week ago. The Iranians believe that the United States follows the strategy of negotiations for more pressure or more pressure for negotiation, in the sense that it is not only assumed that Iran could be pressured into negotiation, but also negotiation is turned into a means to bring more pressure to bear on Iran. In a clearer term, as long as the United States leaders choose to base their policy towards Iran on my way or the highway, they should rest assured that Iran would not compromise its inalienable rights. Meanwhile, I understand that there are people who seek to conclude that Iran opposes any negotiation and conclude that alternative options should be taken up. I must emphasize that they are totally wrong. Iran has never and does not oppose negotiation in any way. I am the ambassador of Iran, and whatever I say is on behalf of myself and my government too. Iran has never and does not oppose negotiation in any way. If the right conditions are created and we are reasonably confident that negotiations could come to fruition, undoubtedly we consider them seriously. Accordingly, I believe that certain ingredients of appropriate conditions for negotiations are as, or could be as follows: mutual respect, respect for Iran's national sovereignty, non-intervention in Iran's domestic affairs, discarding the two-track policy of pressure and engagement, the existence of good faith and political will of mutual understanding, valuing bilateral cooperation in the region, and focusing on extensive common interests of the two countries. Also, it is a fact that there are third parties, as you know, in the region and outside the region, and even in the United States, who feel that they would lose in the case of any deterrent between Iran and the United States. Thus, they spare no effort in impeding the way towards any diplomatic interaction between Iran and the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, in view of the recent calls for negotiation between Iran and the United States, as the Iranian high-ranking officials, including the foreign minister as well as Iranian president, pointed out, we welcome these calls and consider them a step in the right direction and along the path of creating a trustful environment for dialogue. Let me read again. In view of the recent calls for negotiations between Iran and the United States, as the Iranian high-ranking officials, including the foreign minister and the Iranian president, pointed out, as well as the leader himself, we welcome these calls and consider them a step in the right direction and along the path of creating a trustful environment for dialogue. Dialogue with a country that occupies a very important strategic location in the region and has mostly young population of close to 80 million, an educated and skilled workforce, and massive oil and gas reserve, thus possessing a huge potential for cooperating with the outside world. It is safe to assert that Iran is one of the most impactful countries in the region and the world that could help the international community in tackling such global and regional crises and critical situations as stability and security in Afghanistan, Iraq, the Persian Gulf, Syria, and combating extremism, terrorism, trafficking in illicit drug, the spread of weapons of mass destruction, and piracy. Such a nation, shored up by a rich civilization, is able and ready to play a constructive role in the international community. Our history has taught us to cooperate rather than confront. Nonetheless, there are instances in our history where the Iranians demonstrated their combativeness and resilience in the face of outside aggressions. Therefore, I would like to reiterate once more that negotiation is not forbidden and red line for Iran, provided that the United States demonstrates in practice its commitment to dialogue on the basis of mutual respect. In that case, our counterparts should rest assured that Iranian people understand respectful behavior and reciprocate in kind. Allow me to conclude by reading out a passage from the latest speech by the Supreme Leader of Iran, His Eminence Ayatollah Khamenei, which summarizes his perspective about the way out from the current situation. He says, and I quote, "We are reasonable. Our officials are reasonable. Our people are reasonable. We understand reasonable deeds and accept reasonable views. The Americans should show that they do not try to intimidate. They should show that they do not speak and act unreasonably. They should show that they respect the rights of our people, avoid flaring up conflicts in the region, and do not intervene and interfere in Iran's domestic affairs. In that case, they will see that the Iranian political establishment is well-intentioned and our people are reasonable. This is the way to engage the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Americans should prove their goodwill. If they do, then they will see that Iranian people will answer in an appropriate way." Unquote. Thank you to be with me and listen to me more than, I think, you are lucky because, I used to teach in university, and whenever I said I'm going to speak 10 minutes, it became 1 hour. Anyway, thank you very much for bearing with me.
Thank you to both Ambassador Khazaee and Ambassador Pickering. I am David Ignatius, and it's my pleasure now to lead us in a period of discussion. I want to begin by thanking the Asia Society and Suzanne DiMaggio specifically for convening this unusual discussion, but for having been a convener for years now of dialogue between Iranians and Americans trying to find some pathway to better relations. That's a great effort that the Asia Society has made, and it really brings us to this point. Ambassador Khazaee, I want to begin with you, if I might. You gave us a rich statement just now that we're going to want to look at carefully. But I want to take you back over the last several weeks. On February 2nd in Munich, Vice President Joe Biden did what I think many Americans, certainly people in the White House, thought was making a sign of the United States' interest in sincere dialogue of mutual respect with Iran by his statement welcoming negotiations. There was initially a positive statement by your foreign minister, Salehi, but last week there was the speech of the Supreme Leader, which was interpreted by American analysts as rejecting or discounting the possibility of direct negotiations. And because it's important for us to understand where we are now, I want to read you a brief passage that was quoted in the New York Times. "The Iranian nation will not negotiate under pressure. The U.S. is pointing a gun at Iran and wants us to talk to them. The Iranian nation will not be intimidated by these actions." So my first question to you would be, you spoke of the desire for signs from the United States that it's not pointing a gun, that it's not seeking to pressure Iran in this dual track. And my question to you is that a precondition for moving into direct U.S.-Iranian talks, or is that instead something that would be an outcome of those talks?
Thank you, David, for asking this question. Although I think I explained this in my opening remarks, and that's why I try to read out to you a passage of Iranian Supreme Leader, what exactly he said. And I try to be very careful to translate what he said in Farsi. Asking the other side to take off your gun from our head is not a precondition. When we say that negotiation or any cooperation should be based on mutual respect, it means like two civilized partners, we should get together and try to see what are the differences and how we can overcome those differences. So we have not set forth, as you see, and as you heard from me, even what the Iranian Supreme Leader mentioned is just to deal with Iranian based on Iranian rights, mutual respect, not threatening us, not put a gun over our head. And this is the mentality inside Iran. As long as, and I can tell you, because I met almost everybody. I talked to people, I talked to officials in Iran. This is the mentality inside all Iranian, that as long as pressure is on Iran, as long as there is a sword on our neck to come for negotiation, this is not negotiation. So therefore, Iranian cannot accept that. And our history shows that we have never accepted pressure from outside world, and we did not cooperate and negotiate under pressure. So therefore, this is not precondition. Precondition means that, for example, if we say that, okay, we will negotiate with the United States, if United States, for example, give us this or that or do this or that, we have not said that. We say, okay, respect Iranian rights, respect Iranian as a nation, respect our revolution, respect the Iranian sovereignty, and take off your gun from our head, as Reuters said. So the way is paved for further negotiation. And more important, there are many areas that both countries, as well as Iran and the West, have mutual interest in the region. So the door is open for cooperation in even some areas that we have good examples that you know. For example, in Afghanistan and in Iraq somehow, the security of Persian Gulf is important for us and for you and for the United States. This is what we understand, and this is what we believe in Iran, as what the leader said.
I want to come to the areas of possible specific cooperation and mutual interest in a moment, but let me ask you one more question about what the Supreme Leader said. And I want to set this in the context of a well-known statement by former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who has said on many occasions that in his view anything is possible in negotiations with Iran if Iran behaves as a nation, not as a cause. And I'm sure you're familiar with this statement that Secretary Kissinger has made. So I was interested when the Supreme Leader was quoted in the translated version of his comments as saying, "I'm not a diplomat, I'm a revolutionary, and speak frankly and directly." So I think that Americans want to be confident as we think about this period of negotiation that they're speaking not to a revolution, but to a nation that acts as nations do.
It has to do with how we define politicians. Sometimes politicians do not say what they mean.
We know that well here in America. That's
I live in the United Nations.
You must be referring to Henry Kissinger at this point.
No, not exactly. To all. Anyway, I'm not a good politician, so I'm an honest man, to be honest with you. But anyway, I think and I believe what the Supreme Leader meant by saying I'm a revolutionary person, not a diplomat. It means that whatever I'm saying is coming from the bottom of my heart. When I say, okay, as it was interpreted in Reuters and other news agencies, take off your gun from our head, I mean it. I don't want to play with the world. I don't want to deceive the world. When we say that, okay, we do not negotiate under pressure, I mean it. When I say take off your gun from our head, be respectful, I mean it too. The words that I read from his statement are what he believes. He's a religious man. As you say it here, he's a holy man. So therefore, this is what he meant exactly. He didn't want to play with different ideas, saying something in private, saying something in public. This is what he meant exactly.
Thank you.
But thank you for saying that. It's important because understanding each other's culture and dialogue is very important.
Ambassador Pickering, I want to ask you to continue this discussion, and I'd ask you to make reference specifically to what you've learned in what's now some years of track 2 diplomatic efforts, contacts that were not always publicized with Iranians. You know a lot about the parameters for this process that Ambassador Khazaee has sketched for us. And I'd be interested to know basically what you think is going to work and what you would warn us against. You did a little bit of that, but I'd be interested in more.
Thanks, David, very much. Maybe just a few brief comments, particularly in the context of the discussion which we've already launched this afternoon. I think that rehearsing the bad history of the past, which often has to be done for purposes that are political, is not a formula for moving towards success.
That's right.
And I know, in fact, from my long experience that each side has grievances that it believes are real, that are deep, and that are influential. But we also need to look at the future, and I prefer to do that. As a diplomat, I got paid equally for being a pessimist or an optimist. And I decided that sanity meant that I should continue to be optimistic. So I was disturbed by the Supreme Leader's statement, which you quoted, David, and I thought it was, at best, a serious non-endorsement of Vice President Biden's important and significant statement. But I joined with others in believing it was not the final answer, in a sense that it was an oblique statement, not a direct statement. And I was happy today, sitting here with you, to hear Ambassador Khazaee produce yet another statement which I thought, if I could borrow a word from him and the Supreme Leader, was a lot more reasonable. I liked that.
Thank you.
I think that the United States has no wish to put a gun at anybody's head. And the United States has come to understand that it is not very good at changing regimes. And you should take some heart.
If you change more in the Middle East, we'll be more powerful.
We're not very good at that. And I hope you don't feel you're any better at it. Because that's not the kind of encouragement I want to leave in this meeting with you this afternoon. I do think, to get to your question, David, I believe that we ought to talk together. It's important, just as Ambassador Khazaee and I have had the opportunity from time to time to exchange views. And I think that in this chair, he ought to have an opposite number American, who in fact represents the president and the policies of the president, and I think it would be helpful. And I think he's the right man for the job. He's been here for years, he's watched us, he's talked to us, he understands us. Secondly, I attempted to provide some brief thoughts on 3 items, or 4 items, that I thought should become part of our engaged dialogue in the negotiations. A step forward of a small kind on the nuclear to begin with, but with an idea that it is not impossible to frame an outcome in which both sides must be engaged and in which both sides must deliver at the table things that are different and somewhat painful, but are not inevitably invidious to their interests. They are, in fact, represented what I think, in the broadest possible way, is a common vision and an area of common interest. Look, you are deeply concerned, at least that's what you tell us, that somehow our policy, gun to the head, is designed to try to replace your revolution. And we are deeply concerned, gun or no, that the things that you have been doing inevitably lead us to conclude the only end result is to go for a nuclear weapon. You have said that you have a political, religious, or a religious political decree of the Supreme Leader that argues against that. And we, I believe, have made it very clear that we want to work with you as a government to develop a set of ideas in which we can mutually agree, which is in itself totally incompatible with the notion that our objective is to replace your government. After all, why would we sit down and talk to you? And why would we propose bilateral discussions to resolve our problems mutually if, in fact, the gun to the head was designed to change your revolution? Now, I know and understand that countries have causes, and so does Henry. But Henry was very, very concerned that there is a view in the United States that the supreme interest of Iran is somehow to provide a kind of Shia Muslim world. And I don't believe that, but I think that one could, reading revolutionary literature, particularly in the early days, have felt that. You may be concerned that we have adopted the cause of spreading democracy because we believe that in the long run that best represents the will of the people. But in a sense, things will change in each of our countries as the public and the population agree with their leaders to move those changes forward. And I believe that's central to non-intervention and central to governments being able to sit down and find a way to bring themselves together. And finally, I thank you particularly for the second half of your statement, in which you pointed out we have areas of common interest. And we do, inevitably. Now, this is more than the old aphorism, even a broken clock is right 2 times a day. It is more than that, because we have areas we can point to. But let us look at those, and let us look beyond those to see if we can establish the relationship. The hardest thing is to make that first step. But there we are together, 7 of us. That may not be the most balanced negotiating forum. You want to take a look at that. But 7 of us are there. Within that context, it ought to be possible for you to talk bilaterally with any of the other 6. And that should be something we could work on. That will help to strengthen the effort that we must mutually engage ourselves in to pull away mistrust and to try to create a greater sense of understanding. And I hope we will. And I greet your words today as something new. This new quotation from the Supreme Leader puts me back on the side that we aren't there yet, but we have a kind of new opportunity as reasonable people who operate in a logical world and who understand the realities of perhaps making some kind of step. I would hope at Kazakhstan they could find agreement on something. If it's only to have another meeting, I will not die unfulfilled.
Let me ask you, Ambassador Khazaee. I know you want to respond to Ambassador Pickering.
No, I don't want to respond.
But
enjoy it.
I'm disappointed.
You can.
That's a good sign, actually. Thank you.
We do have an important opportunity for a first step or a next step coming up in Kazakhstan on February 26. And I'd like to ask you specifically about what Ambassador Pickering said, that the discussions so far have focused on the idea of increasing confidence by reducing or removing the 20% enriched uranium that Iran has, which is seen by the U.S., by other parties in the negotiation, as being on the path toward possible ability to produce a nuclear weapon. So the immediate question that people will be asking before Kazakhstan is there a path forward on that issue as a starting point to export the existing supplies of 20% enriched uranium, to discuss a cap on enrichment levels, and thereby begin to go down this road on that particular issue. I want to talk about the range of issues between our two countries, but on this particular issue, do you think that may be possible?
Thank you. It's a very important question. Of course, you don't expect me to say or explain how the Iranian negotiating team are thinking about the Kazakhstan negotiation and what they are going to put on the table. Because, of course, they are going to discuss it there. And even if I know the details, which I know some, of course, I'm not supposed to elaborate those details here. But to answer your question, which is important, is that as much as the Iran-US negotiation or dialogue or conversation is not a red line for us, the level of enrichment or stockpiling 20% enrichment is not a red line for us too. The main red line for Iranian on their nuclear program is to enjoy our right within the NPT framework, not more. You know very well, and understand that Ambassador knows very well, that even on the 20% enrichment, Iran did not intend to produce or enrich 20% enriched uranium. We requested from IAEA to provide us with what we need. Then even before producing or enriching 20% uranium, we ask again the international community and United States, which I don't want to reveal more details on that one. I've been involved in some receiving messages on this issue personally, that okay, we need 20% enriched uranium for Tehran reactor, research reactor, because we have 1 million patients with heart disease like cancer. We did not receive any answer from them. If I'm not mistaken, in 2011, again, President of Iran at the General Assembly meeting, and in a meeting which very distinguished thinkers of US thinkers were present, which I see some of them here, he also mentioned that we are ready to give up the enrichment of 20%. No response from the United States. So therefore, enriching 20% by itself is not a big deal. The whole issue is how to respect Iranian rights within the framework of NPT. If we receive what we need for TRR, definitely is not even economically, cost effective to produce that. If we do not, and again, according to the NPT, Iran has every right to produce 20% enrichment for its needs. So this is an issue that could be discussed, of course, the way you described it, but how and in what way both sides are going to negotiate and what Iranians are going to put on the table, we have to wait and see what would be the outcome of the negotiation.
Can I make just a brief point here? So I think that Ambassador Khazaee needs also to note that the IAEA reported very recently that Iran has continued, as it has made 20% material, to convert significant amounts of that 20% material from a gaseous form which can be readily upgraded in centrifuges to a metallic powder form, which is the first stage of creating the fuel elements that are necessary to power the reactor, and I believe gives us some added assurance. Not perfect. It can be reconverted.
That's true.
But it is in a form which is not readily usable for some kind of rapid breakout at high enrichment. And that's a help. And as a result, even though more 20% material has been produced, only slightly more is available in gaseous form. So I think that's important. Secondly, it's been suggested by friends of mine who are a great deal more adept in physics than I will ever be, that one of the things we could do together, which would make some sense, is to work with you on ways to make those reactors more efficient, so that in effect your current plans, which we understand are to make 3 or 4 more reactors to meet your needs for medical isotopes, could continue to be carried by a modernized TRR reactor and therefore reduce the demand for additional 20% material.
That's true.
This all takes us to the point that it would be extremely useful in negotiations for you to spell out what your civil program really is. How many years fuel do you want for the TRR? Even more importantly, how many years fuel do you want of low-enriched uranium? And I say this with some concern, because the only purpose that I can understand that you have for low-enriched uranium is if the Russians welch on the deal to provide fuel for the Boucher reactor. Every other reactor is in what I would call the imaginary stage. It hasn't yet been funded. It hasn't yet been contracted for. And so your immediate needs for low-enriched fuel are probably best at least described at this stage as some kind of hedge against a Russian backout of the fuel they provide. But if we could get on the table from you what the needs are, we could have much more confidence that we could work together in the context of those needs on a civil program that would in one way or another, I think, accord with your desires, but be far from the notion that we have that all of this is leading inevitably to a breakout because there is no specificity here.
Is that kind of dialogue an attractive one for Iran, Ambassador Khazaee? Ambassador Pickering obviously is speaking as a private citizen, but if the U.S. government were to propose discussions about cooperation in some way to enhance the efficiency of existing reactors, to reduce the need to stockpile enriched material, is that a line of discussion that might be possible?
Yes and no. I'm trying, and I'm honest with you.
He's handicapped because I can say anything he wants, and he has a government that he has to serve. And I have been there, so I know what the difficulty are.
I want to tell us about the yes and the no.
No. But I'm not a diplomat. No, I'm saying yes and no because what I'm saying, as I said, I don't want to give you the wrong impression or somehow deceive distinguished audiences. Yes, because, as I said, the main important issue or the pillar of all discussion is that the rights of Iranians be observed and respected according to the NPT. Look, we could say just that we are going to get out of NPT. We could say it. Like some other countries. We could not be committed to the NPT and produce hundreds of nuclear warheads like a regime in the Middle East. But we didn't. We insist that we continue working with the IAEA. So this is an indication how we intend to continue. But enjoying our rights according to NPT, which we are a signatory of it, is the main issue. Being able to enrich uranium in Iran at least at the level of 5% or 3.5%. I'm not expert on those issues, but anyway, to be able to serve our country's needs in TRR, in hospitals, in agricultural purpose, for agricultural purposes, industries and others, for peaceful purposes. But how much, how, when, these are the issues that are not, I should say, ayat from Quran or holy books. All these things could be negotiated to give assurance, more assurance to those. I don't like to say international community, because international community are not only 4 or 5 or 6 countries. Okay, if you have any concern, legitimate concern or allegations or whatever, we are ready to deal with it as we did it. Please do not forget that we suspend all nuclear activities for 2.5 years for the same reason and the same discussion. Nothing was produced positively from that one. So those are not the big deals, those are the details. So yes, because I explained. No, because the main problem is not the nuclear issue of Iran. 16 intelligence institutions or agencies here, they said that Iran do not have and do not intend to produce bomb. Twice. And I am sure that the American intelligence service, they are aware that what we have and what we don't. The point is, as I think you both agree with me, that the mistrust that exists between the two countries. As soon as the other side says something, we just think, okay, there could be something behind that. There's a hidden agenda. So we have to be careful. And probably from the other side as well. So if the mentality, the word that Reuters said, or I don't know, New York Times, take your gun out of our head, is not what the supreme leader said. It was a kind of written in the New York Times. But that's the main point. That's the main point. I don't think any American, I've been living here for almost 2 decades, so I know how people think here. No one in the United States accept that somebody put pressure on him, put a knife on his neck, and ask him to negotiate. Even you don't do it with your son and your daughter, and your father and your mother. The same goes for Iranian. That's the whole point. If we see, as the leader said, as I quoted him, as I say, as another Iranian says, if we see that, okay, there is an environment based on mutual respect, not threatening Iranian every day, not putting pressures and sanctions on Iranian, and putting Iranian people on more problem, leaving them with more problem, of course there are many issues which are not holy issues for Iranian, could be discussed. So no, because there is a big mistrust between the two sides, and we cannot easily accept. And you know, and I think Tom knows very well, that we do not have good experience from the past. Let me tell you this. This is a public, of course, a gathering. I may not be able to reveal some details because of the confidentiality for both sides, Iran and US as well. I respect the confidentiality from both sides. Let me tell you something. On the issue of the same issue on the Iranian 3.5% enriched uranium and 1,200 kilograms stockpile of Iran, I think all of you, or many of you, know that we responded to President Obama's request to Brazil and Turkey. And I think many of you have read the letter that President Obama sent to Erdogan and President Lula. We reacted based on the request of the United States. I remember I was one day sitting in my office, and they called me from Tehran that immediately I have to go to Tehran. I think you know that even traveling for me to Tehran is difficult, because sometimes getting entry visa to come back takes 1 month, 2 months. I don't know how kind of engagement is that, but anyway. Sometimes I get it in 2 days, 3 days, 1 week, but mainly 2 months, 1 month. I cannot travel more than beyond the Queens or Westchester. Anyway.
You're in the best part of the city.
Thank you so much. So I live in Manhattan, so the Central Park is close to my house. I enjoy walking there for 25 kilometers. Anyway, they called me. I went to Tehran. Let me tell you, this is I want you to know. So Mr. Davutoglu, the Foreign Minister of Turkey, talked to Iranian officials saying that, okay, we have received a message from a very known political figure from the United States, which I don't want to mention his name. So he came to us and he said that let's do it and close the deal. Later on, I went there. I was briefed about the issue, and then I came back to New York, and then I went back again. I think within 2 months, I traveled to Tehran 3 times. And because of the situation, they were kind enough to give me visa less than a week. Anyway, then finally, Brazil and Turkey came to us and said, okay, let's do it. And President Obama was kind enough to send a letter assuring them that if you reach an agreement with Iranian, I will support you. I think you have read the letter. Okay? One day, 18 hours, 3 presidents, Prime Minister of Turkey, President of Iran, and President of Brazil, and of course their experts. They got together, they came to a conclusion, and finally they issued Tehran Declaration. Tehran Declaration was signed on Monday. On Monday. Accord to do what? To send out the 1,200 kilograms of uranium, and also for the other arrangement for the enrichment and so on. We agreed. On Monday, based on declaration, they were supposed to inform IAEA within a week, which means by next week, to be effective. I remember that on Saturday, to do whatever we committed, we asked our ambassador in Vienna to send the letter and to give the letter to the General Director of IAEA. On Saturday, I think 10 a.m., 2 days before even the due date, we presented the letter. Okay, I was in New York. Letter was presented to IAEA on Saturday, 10 a.m. or 10:30, something like that. From Tuesday, the United States side started preparing the draft of Resolution 1929. We were not given time to at least exercise or implement whatever we agreed. We were not given time just to test Iranian goodwill, if they are right or wrong. Again, go back to 2003, 2005, go back to other negotiations. So, that's the problem. The problem is the mistrust. If that mistrust, hopefully, is solved, there are many areas to discuss, to cooperate, as long as and as much as we don't want Americans to undermine and ignore their rights according to their constitution, the international rules and regulations. We expect American also and other nations to respect Iranian rights. That's the whole point. So that's why I did not get into details of discussion about the nuclear issue, the Almaty discussion, because the problem is somewhere else. The nuclear issue is not a major problem. Of course, it's a good window, it's a good opportunity to restart, and I agree with Ambassador Pickering that there are good things in that issue that could be dealt with properly if, inshallah, as we say, God willing, we can find a proper environment.
So,
sorry to be long.
No, that was extremely helpful, and I think we understand the yes and the no both. The mistrust, obviously, is a two-way street, as we say. There's mistrust on Iran's side, and there's mistrust on the American side as well. So let me just, before we leave the nuclear issue to talk about other mutual interests,
please
just try to summarize what I think I've heard you say, that if the international community including the United States, will recognize that Iran has a right to enrich uranium, that Iran would be prepared to offer assurances to fulfill the Supreme Leader's frequent statement that Iran does not desire to, intend to build nuclear weapons, which would mean some limits on enrichment, which would mean some verification measures, inspection measures. Am I understanding this basically right?
In principle, yes.
Well, we can all go home then.
No, I felt I'm talking like politicians now. So. Look, of course, we are not negotiating things here. We are just exchanging views and ideas.
But maybe we could go to work. Huh?
Look, it doesn't play that way. In one hand, you say you are not representing the government. At the other hand, so I'm a poor guy sitting here between two distinguished.
I just didn't want to waste an opportunity for you.
Anyway, let me just to react to what you said. See, and I please ask if there is anybody from the media here. Do not take it that ambassador said that we are ready to do this and that, because I don't want to be misquoted. I have it in my. I don't want to show it to you, but Reuters. I read an article from somebody in Reuters a few days ago that said that Iranian rejected to stop the 20% enrichment, which is totally lie. So I don't want to be anyway. But let me tell you this. Fortunately, I brought with me this. Exactly what you said, and thank you very much for reminding me. The fatwa of the Supreme Leader of Iran, which has been repeated many times, and also he repeated just a few days ago in very strong terms, which I have it here. I don't want to read it for you. I don't want to take your time. But that fatwa, we register it as an official document in the United Nations, was sent to the Security Council, was sent to the General Assembly, and the document here is with me, and is registered under A/64/752, and then in 2010. So basically, those who are familiar with Islam as well as Christian, I think they have the same trend maybe. We basically do not register a fatwa. Fatwa is a must for for Muslims who follow a marja or a scholar or an ayatollah. But just to give more assurance that, look, although this is a fatwa by a religious leader that has millions of followers around the world and in Iran, but we register it as a document in the United Nations. It is important. Recognizing the right of enrichment of Iran definitely would be a very good and positive step forward. And I hope that it will happen in practice. Thank you.
So let me turn with both of you now to the question of the larger realm of U.S.-Iranian relations, and in particular the areas where we might have mutual interests. And I'm going to start with really the most vexing issue today for the international community, which is Syria. The goal that the United States has stated frequently, that Russia has seemed increasingly to support, is that there be a political transition in Syria, away from the current regime to some new regime that would provide security and stability, but would also speak to the feelings of the Syrian people. And it was interesting that in Munich, your foreign minister met with the leader of the Syrian opposition, Sheikh Muaz al-Khatib, described it as a positive meeting. So the question I want to start with, when we think about our mutual interests, is it possible that Iran might be ready to think about a political transition in Syria? And that means a transition away from President Bashar al-Assad, which seems now to be the consensus of the international community, and I would say of the Syrian people.
Thank you very much. Now I am not a politician. Since I do not understand the meaning of international community, are China and Russia a part of international community or not? They are.
They are.
Or some other countries in the region. Okay. Basically, I think, David, what you're saying is that the issue of Syria or the crisis in Syria is a very, very critical crisis. I fully agree with you. We agree with the idea of political transition in Syria without President Bashar al-Assad. I'm not going to comment on that because we do not believe that other countries should intervene with the domestic issues of other countries. It has to do with the people of Syria to choose what they want. They want President Bashar al-Assad to go, or they want him to stay. But concerning the kind of reform in Syria, my answer to you is yes. Let me just give you a piece of information that you may not be aware. You know our position about Syria. We believe that the first step is to stop violence in Syria from each side. Doesn't matter. We have been in contact with the opposition groups as well, but not with the terrorist groups that some countries call them opposition groups, and they send arms and financial assistance to them. You may know that more than 2,000 Al-Qaeda members are there fighting with the army of the Syrian and killing people. We do not call them oppositions. Oppositions, like the person that you named, and the real people in Syria that they want to see some reforms. And we have said that, of course, Syrian government should listen to them. But the future of Syria is in the hand of the people of Syria. Therefore, we believe that we have to support any kind of initiative by the United Nations and distinguished representative of Secretary General to solve the problem in Syria. When the former Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, was appointed by Secretary General as well as Arab League, he was not sure if he can travel to Syria or not. You may remember those days. He was in New York. I met him twice within 24 hours. He raised his concern with me, and I told him I'm not sure if the environment is ready in Syria to accept you, because there was some argument between Syrian and the Arab leagues on the matter. Without going to details what happened within 24 hours, just I would like to mention to you that I met with him. I had some suggestions. He had some ideas. I contacted Tehran, and Tehran did their best at the highest level. And finally, we paved the ground for him to go to Syria. And Syrian president and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Syria welcomed him there. It was a big contribution from the Islamic Republic of Iran to move forward for find a kind of solution. We supported Kofi Annan. So the day after, I met him again I think it was in the afternoon something, before he leaves to go to Geneva. And I told him, okay, now you can go. And after a few days, he went to Syria. Finally, unfortunately, he did not succeed to complete his mission. Then, when Mr. Akhtar Ibrahimi also was appointed, we had, I think, at least 2 rounds of the meetings with him in Geneva and in Cairo, I believe. And we discussed the issue with him. We had a meeting here when ministers of Egypt, Turkey, and Iran were here. I was in that meeting as well. We discussed. We had some different views on how to solve the problem over there, but finally we came to an agreement that we have to come with a proposal. So as you know, we have proposed a plan, a 6-point plan from the Iranian side, which basically, if you read it, as if I remember correctly, the first step was to stop violence from any side, sending arms and financial assistance to Syrian opposition, and also a negotiation for reconciliation between the opposition, the real opposition, as well as the government, forming a kind of interim government to take place over there and have election, parliamentarian election. And then the next step would be that the new parliament may elect, would elect a new cabinet, and the new cabinet will have the presidential election in Syria. I think probably Egypt, less likely, but Egypt and Turkey, they may have different views on some steps as what we said, but this is the idea that we have presented. The idea was discussed in Geneva, I think. In Geneva, with Mr. Akhtar Ibrahimi, that he shared also his views with us. You have been in Munich, if I'm not mistaken. We talked to Maaz al-Khatib, as you mentioned it. So this is the role that we play. For Iran, the fate of Syria and the people of Syria is vital and is important. So therefore, we believe that the Syrian situation finally should be in a way that people can decide for their future, and having a democratic elected government and president if they want to have election. And of course, I think President Bashar Assad in that future election may have a right to participate in future election or not, and people have the right to vote for him or not. This is the decision that they have to make.
Ambassador Pickering, I'd ask you to share your thoughts about this question of linkage between the core issue of the nuclear problem and the larger questions of Iran's role in the region, American interests in the region, and how you see that linkage fitting together.
Thank you, David, and I'll do that. Could I just, however, say that I wanted to comment briefly on Syria. I had opportunity to speak about it in Washington yesterday. It seems to me that there are some ideas here that ought to find common ground. We ought to find common ground on the basis that we should find a way to stop the killing. It seems to me there's a humanitarian imperative, and it should come early. And I hope, because I know he's pushing in that direction, that Akhtar Ibrahimi gets some success in doing this. Secondly, I wonder whether it is wise to spend a lot of time negotiating a transitional government when, in effect, the step that is most important, and I think most of us agree, is to have the people of Syria, in as free and as fair a way as we can provide, decide their own future government. My own feeling is that even if Bashar is popular among people who are close to him, the capacity he has to win an election is very limited if it's an open, free, and fair election. So why not, in a sense, with the humanitarian ceasefire, move quickly? The UN has been excellent at conducting elections if it has cooperation. And it needs some cooperation in a situation in which fighting has to stop. But if there were a UN electoral commission, maybe complemented by a Syrian commission representing both sides, not a government, but an electoral commission, we could move through this process fairly quickly. And the new government would have the opportunity, working with the UN, to implement the Kofi Annan plan, which in many cases represents, I think, as close as we can come to an outcome in Syria which respects, as you say, the will of the people of Syria, who do need to be consulted on this,
and sets a stage for a peaceful united Syria in the future. Those are big jumps that I've made. I understand them. I've been around as a long time. But it seems to me, principally, those are the key points that I believe will do the most in bringing about a resolution of this problem. Now, you know, you may have a view that people in Syria will support Assad. Well, let the people in Syria have their voice. Let them decide the future of the country.
They may not.
I'm quite confident they won't. But if we're both confident of the outcome, we ought to be confident of asking the Syrian people in a free and fair manner what it is they want in terms of a future government with or without President Assad. And that, in my view, would be a helpful way to proceed. It is difficult. It will be hard. But I see commonality. I see commonality because I've talked to some of the other players, some of whom you've mentioned, who also say, I hope they mean it, that they believe the people of Syria should be around and make the choice of their future government. Particularly, I hope Russia and China can be brought along. I'm a little concerned that this whole process is conditioned still by the Syrian opposition, which I believe, unfortunately, we make a mistake in supporting, that there has to be a total agreement that Assad goes before we can talk. And my own view is that if you're going to talk about a critical problem, you can't condition the agreement to talk on the basis that the problem is already solved. It won't work. The two sides won't buy into that. And that is not a diplomatic solution. But I think that if we were to do that, I believe there would be more interest in Russia, in China, hopefully in Iran, in moving to a process which could open up the door for an expression of Syrian opinion. But this is not going to be easy. These people are fighting. They're killing each other. We've lost 60,000 people. To get that stability and put it in place will take some time. But the notion that after that happens, you should spend a lot of time arguing about a government which will only be transitional, when in fact you could put in place what I hope would be an electoral process, is, in my view, something we ought to take another look at. Now, how does nuclear fit with all the rest of the things? Nuclear is, with the deepest respect to Ambassador Khazaee, #1 on the U.S. list. That doesn't mean it's #1 on Iran's list, but it does mean if we continue in conversations, we should each be willing to talk about what's on each other's list. I think that's the only fair and reasonable way that diplomacy can function. Secondly, I also believe that nuclear is complicated enough, as I said in my opening remarks, to start small and build trust and work large. But I also believe that in the conversations on nuclear and the conversations on other questions, we could find ways to proceed in tandem. That in fact, opening up the conversation so that in a way, if we ask Iran to make very hard judgments, we can put on the table some things that Iran believes we will have to make hard judgments on in return, so that reciprocity and quid pro quos kind of match up. What I am concerned about, as I said in my opening remarks, is that suddenly the agenda encompasses everything. And before we can settle on one thing, we have to settle on everything. And the old diplomatic aphorism, nothing is settled until everything is settled, is the kind of formula, in my view, for an endless stalemate. It raises serious problems, because if, in fact, we were to engage in that process, then there would be a tendency to say, well, Iran merely wants to drag this. They want to continue to enrich. They want to amass more material. They want to build up their capacity to break out. That will be the suspicion. And it's in your interest, in my view, if the fatwa is the fatwa, to try to dispel that as rapidly as you can. Just as we, I believe, will do what we can to try to dispel the view in Iran that somehow our only objective is to change your regime.
So I'm going to ask Ambassador Khazaee if he'd like to make a last. If we might finish with this, Ambassador, because sadly we've come to the end of an hour and a half. I'd be happy to do this for another 3 hours.
Thank you. This is my last wish.
This is not an execution.
Sitting
This is only a conversation.
between two powerful, thinkers and diplomats. Thank you. Just one
Please.
small comment. I agree with you that negotiation, putting different items on the table is not helpful. I remember once somebody asked me, a friend that you know him as well, that, okay, is Iran ready to negotiate with United States? I said, no, I do not agree that Iran should negotiate with United States. He said, why? I said, because we should negotiate on a specific issue, not negotiation between the two countries. Because as soon as you want to negotiate, there are thousands of complaints from our side, maybe complaints from your side, and though it goes nowhere. The negotiation that I have been talking about in my opening remarks, and also we think if the condition is right, would be helpful, is to negotiate on an issue which is important, that you said would be a nuclear issue. So I agree with you. Just I wanted to second what you said, that we have to try to focus on an issue and negotiate on those things, of course, provided that the condition is ready.
So I want to turn this back to Suzanne DiMaggio. Just in closing, I want to say I sure wish these two could sit down behind the stage and continue their conversation until, and that Ambassador Pickering would be empowered to step out of his private role into a public role. But this was an unusually frank public exchange, and I'm really grateful to both of you.
Thank you so
And
much.
I think we are very grateful to the Ambassador for what you had to say.
Thank you, and thank all of you for joining us. I agree with David. This was an exceptional discussion. I think a public discussion that we've never seen before. I would like to take this opportunity to invite Tom, Ambassador Khazaee, David back again, maybe in a few months, and we can take stock of where we are and how much progress we've made, and hopefully that will be a good discussion. Without. But Asia Society is committed to continuing this sort of dialogue, and we're absolutely thrilled that you were here to be with us and make it such a fruitful discussion. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us and being with us this evening. We have some upcoming programs I think you might be interested in. One focused on another seemingly intractable problem, security in the South China Sea in the coming month. Also, a future of U.S.-China economic relations in the coming decade. And we have two fabulous new exhibitions opening in our museum in the coming months as well. So please come back, see us often, and thank you all for joining us, and thank all of you.